There's a specific amount of money that changes everything about how you sleep at night. Not $1 million, not even 100,000, $10,000. And the weird part is, most people who cross that threshold can't even explain why it feels so different. They just know that something fundamental shifted. The anxiety changed shape. The decisions got easier. The world looked different through the same eyes. This isn't about motivation. It's about math that doesn't get taught, psychology that doesn't get discussed, and a financial reality that separates people into two categories: those who understand what $10,000 actually does, and those who think it's just a number. Let's talk about what really happens. The first thing you need to understand is that $10,000 isn't valuable because of what you can buy with it. A used car, a year of rent in some cities, a medical emergency. Sure, but that's not the point. The point is what it does to the next dollar you earn. When you have $0 saved, every dollar you make has exactly one job: survive until the next paycheck. Rent, food, gas, maybe a phone bill. The money shows up, gets assigned to something that keeps you alive or employed, and disappears. There's no leftover. There's no margin. You're not poor because you're bad with money. You're stuck because mathematics says you are. But at $10,000, something breaks. That next dollar you earn, it doesn't have a job anymore. Not immediately. It can wait. It can think. It can choose. And that optionality, that tiny freedom, changes everything about how money moves through your life. Here's what nobody tells you. The difference between 0 and 10,000 isn't linear. It's not like each thousand feels the same. The jump from 0 to 1,000 is survival. The jump from 1 to 3 is breathing room. But the jump from 8 to 10, that's when the math starts working for you instead of against you. Because $10,000 is roughly the amount where you stop being in reactive mode. Let me show you what reactive mode actually costs. Your car breaks down. You don't have $1,000, so you put it on a credit card at 22% interest. Now you owe $1,200 by the time you pay it off because you're making minimum payments while covering everything else. Your landlord raises rent by $150 a month. You don't have the cash to move, and moving would cost first, last, and deposit anyway, so you pay it. That's $1,800 more a year, forever, because you couldn't afford the $4,000 it would have taken to leave. You get sick, miss 3 days of work, no paid leave. That's $400 gone, plus whatever the urgent care visit costs. You're back another $1,000. This is what poverty actually looks like in numbers. It's not always about income. It's about being forced into the expensive version of everything because you can't afford the cheap version up front. Boots theory. The poor pay more. We know this. But here's the part that makes it vicious. Every one of those situations makes the next situation worse. The credit card debt means less cash flow. The higher rent means less savings capacity. The missed work means you're closer to 0 the next time something breaks. It's not a cycle, it's a gravitational well, and the escape velocity is somewhere around $10,000. So what actually happens when you cross it? First, the obvious stuff. You can handle an emergency without a credit card. That alone saves you hundreds, maybe thousands a year in interest you won't pay. You can wait for a sale instead of buying the first thing you see. You can negotiate better because walking away is an option now. You can take the higher-paying job that requires relocating because you can cover the move. But the real change is psychological, and it's harder to measure. You stop making decisions out of fear. That's not poetic, that's neurological. When you're in financial survival mode, your brain is in threat detection. The prefrontal cortex, the part that does long-term planning, gets overridden by the amygdala, which just wants to make the fear stop right now. That's why broke people make bad decisions that look obvious in hindsight. It's not stupidity, it's cortisol. At 10,000, the fear drops. Not entirely, but enough. Enough that you can think past next week. Enough that you can see a year from now as something other than a vague threat. And when that happens, you start doing things differently without even trying. You say no to the overtime shift because you're actually tired and you can afford to rest. You buy the vegetables instead of the ramen because the difference is $2 and that's not a crisis anymore. You sign up for the certification course because it costs $400 and you know you'll still be okay after. These sound like small choices. They're not. They compound. every single one of them is an investment that someone at zero can't make, and the gap widens every month. Here's the uncomfortable part. The reason 10,000 feels so different is because it proves the system isn't actually designed for you to get there. Think about it. The median American has less than 5,000 in savings. Half the country can't cover a $1,000 emergency without debt. We're not talking about people who don't work. We're talking about people with jobs, sometimes 2 jobs, who can't accumulate the amount of money that changes the math. And it's not an accident. Overdraft fees, minimum balance requirements, payday loans at 400% APR, late fees that cost more than the actual bill. The entire financial infrastructure is built to extract maximum profit from people who are closest to zero. Banks don't make money off your $10,000 savings account. They make it off the $35 overdraft fee when you miscalculate by $12. So, the game is rigged, but not in the way people think. It's not that success is impossible, it's that the friction is highest exactly where people are most vulnerable. The first 10,000 is harder than the next 90, and most people never get past the hardest part. Let's zoom out. If you look at wealth distribution, there's this weird cliff, not between the poor and the middle class, between people who have any savings and people who don't. The difference between 0 and 10,000 is often larger, psychologically and practically, than the difference between 10,000 and 50. Because once you have 10, you understand how money can grow. You can start thinking about a Roth IRA, a down payment, an index fund. You're not rich, not even close, but you're on the other side of a line that most people never cross, and everything from here works differently. The person with 10,000 and the person with 0 might make the same salary. They might have the same degree, the same job, the same expenses on paper, but their lives are not the same. One is stuck in a loop where every dollar is spoken for before it arrives. The other is building leverage, however slowly. And that gap, it doesn't shrink on its own, it widens. So here's the thing nobody wants to say out loud. Getting to 10,000 when you're starting from 0 is borderline irrational. The math doesn't work. You're supposed to save maybe 10% of your income, right? Standard advice. If you make $40,000 a year, that's $4,000 saved annually. Except rent, food, insurance, and debt payments don't leave you with $4,000. They leave you with nothing or close to it. So how do people actually do it? Luck, a tax refund, an inheritance, a stimulus check, a one-time bonus, selling something, moving back home for 6 months. Most people who crossed 10,000 didn't save their way there dollar by dollar. They got a chunk, then protected it like their life depended on it, because it kind of did. This is the quiet truth of financial stability. It's not a reward for discipline. It's often a consequence of a windfall that someone managed not to spend. And if you never get the windfall, the discipline doesn't matter as much as we pretend it does. But let's say you get there. What then? Here's what changes that people don't expect. Your relationship to risk flips. When you're at 0, every risk feels existential, because it kind of is. You can't start a side business, can't go back to school, can't move cities for a better opportunity. The upside might be huge, but the downside is homelessness, so you don't move. At 10,000, you can take a calculated risk. Not a stupid one, but something with real upside and a cushion if it fails. That's where class mobility actually happens, not from working harder at the same job, from making a move that only makes sense if you can afford for it not to work. And this is why generational wealth is so sticky. It's not just about inheritance, it's that kids who grow up in households with savings see risk differently. They watch their parents change jobs, start businesses, go back to school. They learn that stability enables opportunity. Kids who grow up at 0 learn the opposite. They learn that opportunity is a threat you can't afford. $10,000 isn't enough to change your class, but it's enough to change what you think is possible. And that might be more important. So where does this leave us? If you're trying to get to 10,000, the advice is useless. Budget better, cut the lattes, side hustle. Sure, maybe, but if the math doesn't work, the math doesn't work. What you're really looking for is a break, a moment where something unexpected lands and you have the presence of mind not to let it disappear. If you're already past 10,000, the game changes. Suddenly, all the advice actually applies. Invest the difference, automate savings, build the emergency fund to 6 months. You're not rich, but you're in the part of the map where the normal rules apply. And if you're way past it, if you've got 50 or 100 or more, it's worth remembering what the bottom looked like. Because the people still down there aren't stupid or lazy, they're just stuck on the wrong side of math that punishes them for being there. Here's the unresolved part. We talk about financial literacy like it's the problem. Teach people to budget. Teach them about compound interest. Fine, but literacy doesn't fix a system designed to keep people below the threshold where any of that advice works. The first 10,000 isn't a financial achievement, it's a structural one. And until we admit that the gap between 0 and 10 is wider than the gap between 10 and 100, we're going to keep pretending that people are failing when really the floor is just missing. So the question isn't how to save $10,000. The question is, what kind of economy requires people to have 10,000 just to start playing the game fairly? And what happens to everyone who never gets the entry fee? That's the part we don't like to think about, but it's the part that matters most.